So I want to welcome Bella Miller to our group today. We had a wonderful session, right? We all became friends, and now you can join and be part of our friends. Okay?
Love friends.
Yeah, I know you do. So she's going to talk.
Should I talk to you?
It's very sensitive, so I think you just can talk regular, right? Try it.
I'll try it. Anyway, as she told you, my name is Bella Miller, and I'm a Holocaust survivor. I was born in Eastern... Is that all right like this? I was born in Eastern Poland. The town was a small town called Borislav. It was only a small town, however, it was a very well-known town because we had petroleum industry. And we supplied most of Poland with petroleum. The population there, I can't tell you how many people were there, but I know that more or less that there was about 30% Jewish, the rest were Polish, and there were also some Ukrainian people. And I am we lived in a lovely home, and my father, my mother, my brother and I, and we lived on one side, and my mother's aunt and her family lived on the other, and there was another small apartment. I just have to take a quick what I wanted to tell you for. My father had a very lovely store, ladies' garments on the main street. He used to travel to different people, during the year the manufacturer used to come to him, or he used to go there. Anyway, my parents were quite comfortable. When it came September 1st, 1939, war came to Poland. The Germans walked in, and immediately they put edicts that the Jewish children cannot go to school. And then they came into our house and took my father and told him to open the store. And he went with them, opened the store. They had a truck. They loaded up the truck like was their stuff. And they left my father. So at least my father came back home. During the time, obviously there was not much left in the store, but there was a Jewish community they opened, and they gave you special cards and people had to go to work. Now, the Germans at that time were very short time with us because Hitler and Stalin made a pact and they divided Poland, and my part went to the Russian. And when the Russians came, I could go back to school. They treated everybody normally. Sometimes there were shortages of food or something like this, but everybody, whether they were Jewish or not Jewish, it didn't matter. You used to get ration cards and you used to sometimes stand in line to get some food. However, because my father owned a store, a beautiful store, he used to be considered a capitalist, and you never knew when they would come. There was the MKV, there was the secret police. You never knew when they would come and maybe take you to Siberia. In retrospect, after I tell you my story, it would have been better if we went to Siberia, because at least you had chance of survival. The Germans stayed for a while, and Hitler and Stalin again after that, Hitler double-crossed Stalin and invaded Stalingrad. So the Russians left and the Germans came in. When they came in the second time, there were all kinds of pogroms. I don't know, do you know what a pogrom is? They used to pull people on the street, the Jewish people, and they used to beat them. Some they would take out and they would just throw them in wagons, and you never saw from them again. A pogrom would last sometimes 2-3 days, sometimes a few more. They also used to come to your home and try to take you out from home, and you never knew when they're going to come to your house. When the Germans came the second time, they made also a lot of the Ukrainian people a police force. And they were just as brutal, if not more, as the Germans. and they used to come to your home, beat you up, and whatever. My parents realized that you never know when they're going to catch us or come to the house, and they better build some kind of a place that we can save ourselves for a little while. My uncle, who lived with us, he used to own a tavern, and we had a large basement in our house, a long, large basement, and he used to keep liquor there and wines and things like this. My parents and my aunt and uncle decided to build a hiding place. They closed off some of the basement, a small area. They put shelves, and when they knew that the pogrom was coming, or they found out that there was a pogrom, we would climb in and hide there. Now, this shelter was made, they put a wall on both sides in this small area, and they put shelves, and my uncle put wine and liquor on the shelves, and the opening was about this size, and you used to climb in, a small opening, you used to climb in, and you hope that they'll never get to your building. However, one time they did get, oh, by the way, sometimes they would come with dogs, and we were afraid that the dogs would smell that there are people there, what is going to happen. But I was told, I don't know how true it is, they were told that if you put a little pepper around the area of the hiding, that the dogs will not be able to smell their people. Well, one of these times, they did break our gate of our house, and they came to our house, to our building, and looking for Jews to either deport them or beat them or whatever they wanted to do with us. And we were hidden at that point. I want you to know my heart was beating so that when they came down to the basement, I stood for sure that they are going to hear my heart beating and they will find us. However, they were more interested in the liquor and the wine, so they collected a lot of that stuff and they left and went on. This went on for a while, but my parents realized that at some point they're going to come and take us and deport us, something will happen. And they found a place where we could hide in a young Gentile's home. She lived a little bit off from the town, and she had a big house, and she was hiding Jewish people. And when we came, there were already quite a few people in her house. And they built in there, her house was a big house, but she did not have a basement. So I'll tell you how there was built the hiding place. In a corner like this, 4x5 or 3x4, in Poland they used to have those beautiful tile stoves for keeping warm the different rooms, and many rooms had those special tiles. On the side was an opening, and where the coal and the wood went, and on the bottom, in case sparks come, there was a metal plate. That metal plate was removed, and they built underneath a small tunnel, and they put 2 shelves down, and if she would occasionally, which there wasn't too often, she would have people maybe come in or something, even though they might be by the door or something, we would quickly hide there. During the night, we must have been there, I don't remember, but at least 12 people. During the night, we all slept upstairs, and we had little, say, mattresses or something on the floor, and we all slept there. She also had to supply food for us. You used to pay quite a lot of money to be hidden, but the people deserved it. But anyway, and her parents, who didn't live with her, also felt that, that should help her in buying food. So she used to buy, mind you, she lived by herself, and even with her parents were another 2 people which lived in a different place, they used to buy food. And one day she found out that people was talking, her name was Yanka, I don't remember her last name, but her first name was Yanka. She is hiding Jews, we have a feeling. And she got scared, she felt that they might possibly denounce her or something, and she told us that we have to go, we have to leave. Now, my parents, I don't know how they found other places where to hide, but they had another place further away in town, and my brother was much older than I. My brother would take me by the hand in the middle of the night, and my parents would walk with me to the other place, and my parents would come later. And the man had also a few other people who you handed in quite a lot of money for it to be hidden there. That was a very short-lived time because he felt that some neighbor saw something and he might be denounced to the police. So after he took the money, within a few days he made us leave. My parents found a third place. Those days we had no cell phones, you didn't have a telephone. How they knew it, how they found it, maybe they had a list, I never found out. Anyway, we went to the other place. The woman had her daughter, was getting married that day, and she was getting married to a Ukrainian policeman. We came during the night. My brother took me by the hand and went at night, and my parents came after, and she put us in a shed, and we haven't heard from her the whole day because she had a wedding. When the wedding was finished at night, she took us out, gave us some food, and we were able to go to the bathroom, and we stayed there for a while. My brother used to leave, and I don't know whether it was once a week or once a week and a half, go someplace and pick up money. Now, we never had the money with us, but there was hidden someplace, and I don't know, because at that time I was 7 years or 8 years, so I had no idea where it was. And my brother used to go middle of the night and bring money, and we used to pay them for it. One night my brother left, and he never came back, and he was caught by the police. He was caught by the Ukrainian police, and her daughter didn't know that and her son-in-law that she was hiding Jews, but somehow they were able to find out that somehow my brother was taken by Ukrainian police, and he was put to work there to clean cells and things like that. So that's what he was doing, but there was no money coming in that week, and that family called the police, and they denounced us. And the police came, picked us up, and took us to jail. When we got to the jail, there were loads of people already in jail from different hiding places or wherever they found them. And I remember it was winter time, because in jail, sometimes they have those little openings, because I remember that somebody would take a little stick and give me a little snow, something to wet just to have something to drink or something like this. So we used to take snow like this. A lot of people at that time were taken to different places and shot, because one of the people being in jail was one of my aunts, my mother's sister, and her family. And we found out later on that that's what happened to them. During that time, while we were hidden in those places, there was a ghetto made. And people lived in that ghetto. There was a certain section of Borislav that was closed off. Actually, before we were hidden, we were still in that ghetto, and then we went. At that point, I think they must have closed the ghetto, but they needed people to work, and they sent us koshare. Koshare used to be end of the town with barracks where the soldiers used to, Polish soldiers before used to train. The Polish soldiers were taken out from there, they put barbed wire around it, and we were in those koshare. And usually there were not too many children at that point left, but they used to give my parents and my brother, all the people, they had to go to work, because in petroleum industry, they needed a lot of people to work. And the few kids that were there, we used to hide in the attic of the building, and when my parents came at night, and my brother, we used to come down a little bit, and that went on for a while. One morning, they got us up about 4 or 5, and the koshare was surrounded, and the Germans came, and they were liquidating part of the koshare. Some people had to go to work still, but the rest was going to be transported to camps or to concentration camps. My parents somehow found or knew about it, that there was a hiding place. It was a potato bin someplace, like in a cellar, and we slid in there, and about 10 or 15 other people went down there, and they never looked, but they picked up the people, whoever they found that had to register with them, and they took him out. That night was very quiet, and somebody went out to check if the Germans were gone, if we could sneak away. And everybody from that basement crawled out, and we went to the barbed wire. That barbed wire was not electrified, because Auschwitz was electrocution, you would have been electrocuted. But here was just barbed wire. They cut the barbed wire, and we walked to the forest, because in forest they were supposed to have bunkers where you can hide. Somebody knew where a bunker would be, and we went deep into the forest, and sure enough there was a bunker. And I'll tell you how a bunker was being built. If you went to the forest and looked at the ground, you wouldn't know that anybody is underneath there. There was like a third of this room was a bunker, was a big hole, but they shored it up with wood, and they put like bunks, and we were able to sleep on them. But if you are in the forest, you need water and you need food. So they had to build those bunkers near some kind of not waterworks, either a lake or a stream or something. And at night they would go out and empty the excrement and bring some water. And also you needed food. But what happened, the women used to at night put out, they used to have the simple metal stoves with a pipe, and they used to put the pipe out when we hoped the hunters wouldn't be there at night, and the women used to cook some food, and we see, obviously in forest you don't have food, so there was always one person whom you gave a lot of money, you had to have money, and they would go someplace in town. They had special places where they paid an awful lot of money, and they would get once a week, and they would get food for us. They would bring potatoes and bread and what have you. So we had some food. And they always had to come back at a certain time, because if they didn't come, we knew that perhaps they were caught, and they were afraid that if they are being tortured, that they will give up where we are hidden. And that went on for a while, that we lived like moles under the ground. And I tell you, I don't know if you could find a place like that, because the opening was very small, and there was a step going down, and then you stayed in that underground all the time. At night, where they would take off that little opening to get some air into it, and of course you had like lamps with oil lamps or something like this, so we had a little light. And sure enough, one night, the man that was supposed to bring the food, he never came back. So we realized after a while he's not coming back, that he must have been caught, and if he's caught in being tortured and he's going to divulge the place, we will all be killed. So my parents took me by the hand, and there were quite a few other people there, and we walked deep into a forest to find another bunker. We walked for hours, we found another bunker. However, they could take women and children. I was the only child, happened to be at that time, but they couldn't take the men because they didn't have room. It was very tight. So in the forest was a tremendous pine tree. It was down. The men pushed the branches up, and the men made little places for them to sleep under the branches in the forest. And we were in the bunker. And in the morning, they used to send me with like little buckets on a certain stand with food, and I used to bring it to the men. Believe it or not, I would be scared stiff to go now through the forest like that. But I felt so proud. I was just a kid, and I saw cheapest that I can be part and help in it. So that went on for a little while, but they realized if winter comes, the men cannot sleep under the in the tree. So they said that they're going to try deep down. There was deep down in the forest. Hopefully nobody will see it. There will be no hunters. They're going to build another bunker. And people from other bunkers came and helped them to build another bunker. Took for a while, and finally they built the bunker, and we moved all into that new bunker. Unfortunately, that was very short-lived. Somebody must have seen it and denounced us, because one early morning, the German police, the Schutzpolizei, and the Ukrainian police came with guns drawn, and they knew exactly where the little opening was, and they told everybody, raus. So we crawled out from that hole, and they wouldn't go and look underneath, so they took a grenade, and they threw it in and blew the stuff up. They took us at that time, they took us back to the koshare that I told you, because there were still people there because they needed people for work. And they took us all there, and there were not very few children, and at that point they also put my parents to work, and I used to hide in the attic. And they told people, if anybody tries to escape from the workforce, we are going to find them. For the most part, nobody escaped, but one day they came and they were short 3 people. And they sent the Ukrainian police to look for them. And took them about 2 days or so, and they found them someplace else in the forest, believe it or not. And they brought them back. And I remember as a kid with a few others, we were hidden in the attic, and they put them in the middle of the yard where all the buildings were that we were living, and they shot them and they left it. 2 of the people, my next door neighbor and his son, were there, Mr. Haberman and Josek. The 3rd person I didn't know, and they left them lying there. And when the workforce came back, they said, this is what's going to happen to you if you try to escape. Well, obviously, not too many, it was not easy. Believe me, you're surrounded by police, you could not escape. And we stayed there for a while, and after that, my parents went to work, and because we were close to the Carpathian Mountains, and you could hear rumblings. I guess there was not shooting, but you could hear the ammunition and things. I think the Russians were coming closer to our hometown or to that area. And they felt that, hey, they better liquidate the koshare. So one morning they got us all up very, very, very early, like 4 or 5 in the morning, and they marched us through town to the railroad station. In the railroad station, they had cattle cars, and they shoved us all in the different cattle cars, and they sealed them off, and we were going away. We didn't know where we were going or what is happening. Believe it or not, the trip took 2 weeks, and we arrived in Auschwitz, Poland. What happened, I guess the Russians were surrounding different areas and they couldn't get through. So we traveled through Hungary and through Austria, and we got back to Poland, to Auschwitz. When we arrived in Auschwitz, they opened the cattle cars. Of course, they used to bring a little food into the cattle car occasionally and take the excrement and what have you. But when we arrived in Auschwitz, they opened the cattle cars and they had inmates from Auschwitz to get us all out, raus, schnell, quickly, you have to get out. And they grabbed my father and brother and all the men and put them on one side, women on the other side. I never even had to say goodbye or kiss my father or brother goodbye. And I never saw them again. Anyway, and the women they put on another side. And that famous Dr. Mengele, Dr. Des, you probably heard Joseph Mengele, he used to make the selection. They stood the women in like rows of 2s or 3s, or I don't remember exactly. But when we were getting out of the cattle car, one of the inmates told my mother, whatever you are asked how old your daughter is, make her older. She didn't know what it meant, but that's what he said. When Mengele was making the selection, I was by the way, I wasn't quite 12, but I was very tall for my age. I was much taller than normal. Now I shrunk 2 inches already. When you get old, you shrink. Yeah. So Mengele came by and looked at me and he said, "Wie alt bist du? How old you are?" And my mother quickly chimed in that I was 15. He looked at me, I don't know if he believed it or not, but he sent me with my mother. My aunt was my younger cousin. They went this way. And he was making, you went right or you were left or right, whichever, and that's it. When the selection finished, they took us, you probably saw those signs of Auschwitz. I imagine you saw Arbeitsmarkt frei, work makes you free. Anyway, they took us into Auschwitz, inside of Auschwitz, because that was happening. The selection was on the railroad tracks. And they took us to Auschwitz and they took us to a bunker. And there were a lot of women that were working. We had to disrobe. And they had like shaving thing, and they took our hair, they shaved our heads, and they put us into a shower. There was just cold water running. You see, in those days, at that time, I didn't know about gas chambers and things like this. And we stood there wet, and then they brought the clothes. I think they disinfected the clothes. They must have put it in the disinfectant, and they threw it on the ground, and whatever you grabbed, that's what you wore. And they took us to Lager B in Auschwitz. They had 42 different lagers, and the lager was with the barracks on both sides, and there was an electric barbed wire around each. Every morning they had what was known as Zählappell, which means you used to get up very early and stand regardless of rain, snow, whatever. You had to stand and be counted. And that used to go on for a while, and there was a transit lager. So many times, different people from different places, they used to bring him in to that lager. We were for quite a while in that lager, and I remember once they said you were always starved to death because your food was maybe a piece of bread this size and some black water or something. It was supposed to be tea. And at night you got some soup. There was a dark brown water and tea. And you were starved and you're getting slowly very thin. But this is all we got. And after a while they took us from that lager. Oh, I was running. They threw out, they didn't give people food, but they had stale bread. And they threw it out. And somebody said, oh, they threw some stale bread out. And I was running to try to get it. And I fell and I cut my knee. There was no place to wash it or this, and it became infected, but that healed later on. And they took us from Lager B and put us on Lager K. And Lager K, we were in similar bunkers. I don't know if you ever saw pictures. You have about 8 or 9 people on each level sleeping. That's just pure wood. There's no cover, there's no pillow, nothing. You just stand. And the only thing that you owned was a little bowl and a cup. And that you kept. If somebody stole it, you didn't have it. But anyway, that was all your possessions. So anyway, so we went to Lager K. They used to take us in the morning, and they used to take us to a hill when there were big rocks, and we had to carry those rocks from one side to another. The next day we used to bring them back to the same place. Everything was done to make your life even more miserable. We stayed in that barrack in Lager K. Then they took us, by the way, they also tattoos us. And I'll show you, I have the tattoo. You see, you didn't have a name. You didn't have a name, but you had a number. And I'll never forget that number, A24977. That will stay with me forever. I might not remember what I did this morning, but this I'll remember forever. And from that lager, they took us back to Lager C. Lager C is where they had a Weberei. Weberei, it is a weaving place. What you had there was, in the barrack, you had a long, like a table like this, except it was stretching through the entire room, and on each seat there was a nail attached to the table. And they would bring fabric, just chunks of fabric and chunks of rubber. And the rubber was never divided, but it had to be divided, and that was very difficult, hard work. And you had to cut it in strips, and you were supposed to make 24 meters of this braid. You attached the rubber and the fabric to the nail, and you had to weave it, and you had to intend. And sometimes the Germans would come and grab your thing and try to tear it, and if you tore it, you got a good beating if it didn't stay together. At the end of the day, when you finished it, what you put on that finished your portion of what you were supposed to make. I never made a 24 meters, but I hope that they'll never check mine. I was lucky they didn't check mine, because there were so many people in the barracks, and they all threw it together. And that went on for quite a while. We were there, and we were starving to death. And when the Jewish holidays came, they said, oh, the Jews, they fast on New Year's, we won't give them food today. Suddenly they became conscious of our religion, and we didn't even get this little food. And when we were working in the Lager C and the Weberei, they said apparently that those things were taken for the Germans, to the Russian front, that they used to, apparently, I don't know how true it is, that they used to put that weaving around their boots to keep them warmer, because it was very cold in Russia. Anyway, my mother, because of hunger, I guess, she had got swollen legs. What they called it is like elephantitis, because they were very heavy. She couldn't reach them together. And there used to be a building where they took sick people. Obviously, there was not a Red Cross or anything. You might have gone to the gas chamber there or what have you. And we stayed in that barrack for a while, and somehow I was fortunate that I was able to go with my mother, because I told them that I was sick too, and the lady was kind, the capos, because the capos who ran some of those camps, they were mean and miserable. But anyway, they let me stand there, and we stayed there for a while, just a few days, and you used to always hear, even near Auschwitz, a rumbling of artillery and things. The Russians were going to come closer. And one night, and there was January 27th, which now they have a special Holocaust memorial now for January 27th. It was on Monday, they had the international memorial for the Holocaust survivors. And we were liberated. My mother slowly, the Russians came, I remember, at night, but we were so emaciated that if I was there another few days, I think I would have passed away already, because what they called us, the Russians, is Muslims or skeletons, because we were skeletons. They found a few children around, and I came from my barrack, and the Russians took our pictures, pointing to the numbers. The Russians at that time did not have that much food, but they had enough potatoes and bread, and that was like heaven to us. And at that time, I started roaming through the camp. You see, we were in Auschwitz-Birkenau, which was the biggest hellhole. At that time, the Russians decided to move us to another area of Auschwitz, also in Auschwitz concentration camp, but there the buildings were brick buildings. I don't know if any of you went to Auschwitz to see it, because at this point, they have one barrack standing in, and obviously the gas chambers and the ovens are demolished, but they're still there. Anyway, so we were there for quite a while, and they would give us some potatoes, and since they brought us to the big building, there were stoves, and my mother would cook the potatoes, and I was walking through just walking roaming around through Auschwitz, and I went to one of the offices, and I'll never forget it. When you walked in over, they had a wall like this, maybe smaller, and there was a fresco of people hanging. Can you imagine working and looking at people hanging? But they also had a lot of blueprints hanging around. Believe it or not, I picked one of the blueprints. Now we are working with the museum. They might fix it and have it hanging in New York in the Heritage Museum, because I was there on Sunday, but that's another story. Yeah. So anyway, they kept us in there till about March, I think, in Auschwitz, and then they took the few children I find and my mother, and they took us to Katowice. Katowice was someplace that belonged to Silesia. Sometimes it belonged to Germans, and it was Poland. Always the borders were changing. Anyway, they said in Katowice there was Caritas, where the Sisters of Mercy are going to be, and they are going to try to help you. When we got there to Katowice, there was nobody there. There's empty rooms. And we found and there were children. I couldn't communicate with them all because some were Hungarian, some were Czech, and I didn't speak it, but I spoke Polish because I was from Poland. But there were a couple of boys. They said that they were twins, but one was very tall and one was very small. I don't know how that, but anyway, and they were there so I could communicate with them. And anyway, we found the toys and we went to the market in Katowice and we sold some of the toys and we got some food. And they used to bring, somehow they would send a little food to us, but we were very hungry. And I made, as loads of kids, we used to roam through the field and we saw a field and we saw that there was onions and we tried to grab it. Later on we found out that there were tulip bulbs, not onions. We didn't know from it. Anyway, we were for that. They also opened in Katowice a small Jewish center. Don't forget, the war wasn't finished till much later, and we were liberated 45 on January 27, 1945, and we were there in March. And I remember where President Roosevelt died in April. I'll never forget that. And we was in Katowice. But my mother used to go to the community center to find out if they can find out if my father or my brother, if anybody, my aunts and uncle who survived from the family. We didn't. But my mother was very, very enterprising, believe it or not. Without her, I wouldn't have survived. I doubt it. And she also found out whether there's any towns that have somebody from our hometown that survived. And we found out that Chorzów was the next town, that there was a small Jewish community center, and there was a lady who was from our hometown, Mrs. Zucker, and we happened to know her, and that she is working for the Jewish community center. My mother decided that we are going to go to that center, and sure enough, she was very happy to see it. And she had an apartment because what happened, the Germans took over the Jewish apartments, but when the Germans flew, there were apartments left, so she took one apartment and she took us in and she worked in the kitchen so we would get some food. My mother also felt she was very much for education and she felt, hey, I lost so many years of going to school that I have to go to school. And she enrolled me in school, and I went to school there for a while. And I did quite all right in school. But then my mother decided to stay in Chorzów, was not think we have to go someplace that perhaps we can find my father and my brother and something more. And she decided there were trains going to Germany, to Munich, because they had there a Funkkaserne, I believe it was called, where there was like a lager and was running by the American, by UNRWA. And she found out all this, and one night we had nothing special. We had no luggage or anything. My mother collected me, and we went to the train, and we hopped over, and the train was always full going something, so you stood on one foot, and you traveled, and we arrived in Munich. And Munich, they took us to Funkkaserne. By the way, when we were leaving Auschwitz, the Polish Red Cross came and gave us cards, so we have some ID with the Red Cross. So if we had to travel on a train or on a bus, they would accept the card and they would let us through. Anyway, so we were in Munich for a while, and my mother tried to find out about my father and my brother, but unfortunately, she couldn't find out anything about them. So we stayed in Munich for a while. Then came the people from different DP camps, and we were taken to a DP is a displaced person camp, and we were taken to a DP camp in Bad Reichenhall. Bad Reichenhall is Bavaria. It's not very far from Salzburg. The area is beautiful, but unfortunately we were in DP camp. But DP camps were not bad. They had a kitchen, so you got some food, and you had a small room, and few extra people lived with you. I had a little bed with my mother, so that was lucky. There were some other people next door because several families were moved into it. And in Bad Reichenhall, they had a school, Ort School. Ort is Organization for Rehabilitation Through Training. That's a Jewish organization, and they still run it, and they still have it. They teach you a trade, and they also teach you different subjects. So I was there for quite a few years, and they were teaching us, at that time was still Palestine before it became Israel, so they tried to teach us a little Hebrew. They tried to teach us math and other subjects, and since my mother was all for education, she found a German lady used to come to a camp. She spoke English, and she used to teach different people English. And my mother managed to get her. We had no money, but she would give us some things like food or something, and she used to teach me a little English. And my mother hoped that we'll be able to go to United States. And at one point, we were able to sign ourselves to go to United States. But obviously, you didn't jump through fences or anything. You had to wait 4 or 5 years before you were able to go if you got something. And I was going to that school, or they also taught you sewing. But they used to sew ladies' corsets. I want you to know I hate sewing. But I can do a button, all right. So anyway, so we were there for quite a while, and I was lately. She also had some people that she knew from our hometown who survived, and some of them used to be a teacher. One was an engineer, but they knew exactly what doing, and we would get extra lessons just to make up for some time. Eventually, I met some friends there, and we used to go. Bad Reichenhall, by the way, was next door to Berchtesgaden, where Hitler had his bunker. I have never been to the bunker, but from Bad Reichenhall, we used to go occasionally and watch ski jumps. At that point, you see, at that point we was already liberated, so we could do it, and young people sometimes find things to do. Anyway, we stayed there, and about 4 years later or something like this, it came to, by the way, I met some friends there, and there was a young man, he lost his parents, but his brother and sister-in-law survived, and he was going to Australia. And he says, you know, Bella, when I get to Australia, I am going to try to get you papers and things for you and your mother, and you'll come to Australia. I said, all right. I was too young. But anyway, 4 years later, papers came from America, and they sent us to another camp. It was in Germany, Aschau, because there was a transit camp that you can go to United States when the papers came. So we stayed in Aschau in the camp. There was also barracks where the few families lived in one room. And believe it or not, the Australian papers came at the same time as the American papers, within a day. And my brother said, we're going to America. And that was a good thing. I said, that's great. So eventually they took us to Bremenhaven, that's the port in Germany, and they put us on a boat, and there was General Muir, there was an army boat. And the first night when we got on there, they had a cafeteria. I thought there was heaven. They had all the good food and stuff, and we could have it. And then they put us on the lower level of the boat. Once the boat left, the next day I was so sick, and I was for 10 days. And I said, maybe somebody should throw me overboard. This is enough. It's such a horrible feeling. But you meet people, you sit outside, and I don't know if you're interested, I'll tell you what happened later. And we arrived in Boston. And in Boston, the Red Cross came, and they brought donuts and coffee, which was great. And our papers read that we have to go, I believe, either to Jersey City or Union City. And we didn't know from one place to another where we're going to go. And when it came for us to depart, they said, we have no room for you refugees in Jersey City and Union City. You have to, they gave us tickets, and they sent us to Omaha, Nebraska. We arrived in Omaha. They had a very nice Jewish community center there, and there were ladies who were well off, and they used to take care of refugees. And I remember arriving in the center, and the ladies were very lovely, and they put us for 2 nights or 3 nights in a hotel. And I remember the hotel had a machine for Coke. I thought that was the greatest thing that ever was invented in those days. I don't drink Coke now. Now I drink water, if I remember. But anyway, so we were there, and they said they knew I had some English, and they said, we are going to enroll you in high school. And I was put in the senior class. And I had a lovely teacher, and she says, Bella, if you don't understand something, I'll tell it to you in Germany. Because when I was in Germany, I also had German teachers, and I learned German. Her German was worse than my English. So couldn't help you, but still, she was very nice. I was there as a senior, and when I finished school, they found me a very good job, and I was working in Omaha. The company was Continental Grain Company. It was a company, they had grain. They were the largest company in the world, and they had offices in South America and Europe, all over. They had the grain elevators, but I was always fortunate I worked in an office, because when I was going to high school, I was also going at night and taking business classes, and on Saturday and Sunday I used to work in places, so I was always busy, and I was able to manage. And the company was very nice, and they have also offices in New York City, quite a few. And my mother, she was always very enterprising. She says, we were 2 years in Omaha, and she says, New York is the place. I didn't know from anything, but she said we should be in New York. We had no family here, but she says we'd be better off in New York. It's a big metropolitan city. It would be better to be there. And so I told my bosses that I'm going to New York City. My mother wanted me, and they said, we are sorry to live there. I guess I was a pretty good worker. I was good in mathematics, so I used to work on charts and things like this, and they were able, but they said, you know what, when you go to New York, we will arrange that you have a job in our offices in New York. When the comptroller comes, we are going to introduce you, and I'm sure you'll have a job there. So that was a plus. You couldn't go with a job. Those days, by the way, I don't know if you know, but you made 70 cents an hour, and that was a good good fee, 70 cents an hour. When you compare it with nice, my gosh, how did you eat? But anyway, in Omaha, they took us, by the way, out from a hotel, and they found us an apartment. And you wanted to be able to really pay for yourself. They paid for a while, but then when I was making some money, we were able to pay. And my mother took even to our room a lodger, and she was able to cook a little bit, and he paid a little bit. And that way we were able to pay for our maintenance to have it. Anyway, when we got, so New York, I had a job already. It's time for finish?
No.
Oh.
I want to give them a chance to ask some questions.
Okay.
So get to your husband and talk about your husband.
Oh, my husband. Well, there was my husband I met in New York when I was living. He was a lovely guy, and I don't know if you know Wyckoff. Anybody knows Wyckoff? Yeah. Well, Miller's Pharmacy in Wyckoff. That was my father-in-law's, and my husband worked there. And I met him on a blind date. And I used to kid him I was blind, that's why I married you. But he was the nicest guy in the world. And unfortunately, my husband was born in Passaic, and they lived in Wyckoff. When he was a youngster, they moved to Wyckoff. They had drugstore in Passaic, but during the Depression, my father-in-law lost the drugstore, and they moved to Wyckoff. And the farmer, I forgot his name, he's a well-known farmer, his name's streets after him. He told my father-in-law that he will open a drugstore for him, that he can open a drugstore, and when he makes money, he'll pay him back. And that's what happened. By the way, the drugstore is still Miller's Pharmacy in Wyckoff.
That's so good.
Yeah, so
and how many children do you have?
I have 3 children.
And how many grandchildren
Only
do you have?
one, but I'm ready to adopt. Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
will you answer some questions?
Yes, by all means.
Okay, so does anyone have any questions for Bella? Did you ever
Yes, I
return to
did.
your homeland?
I did go there, and 2 or 3. One of my cousins, his parents were killed, but he survived, and he lived in Ann Arbor, Larry, and he says, how about if we go home? And there was another young man who used to go back and forth to our hometown in Borislav, and he went with us. And I went, let me tell you, first of all, it's not Poland now, it's Ukraine now, because the borders have changed. And don't forget, this is all these years, 70-some years later. I practically didn't recognize our house. We had a beautiful balcony and things like this. It looked dilapidated. I understand the oil wells dried up too. And I was there for a short time. I was going to go to the koshare where I was being kept with the barbed wire. I was afraid a little bit, and I never went there. And I never went up to our apartment. I didn't know. Suppose I would see things that I remember, some painting or something would have been. So I never went back. And we went just to Warsaw and Krakow, and we came home. But I never went. I went, by the way, to Auschwitz. And I went to Auschwitz. My cousin thought I was insane. Maybe I was. But I went back. But let me tell you, in Birkenau, they have one barrack. Those are wooden barracks and those branches. But believe me, it now looks like a Boy Scout camp comparing to what was before. Now the grass is growing on the ground. There was nothing on the ground there. Before there was rocks and mud. So anyway, if anybody has any other question, I hope you can answer. But you know more about me than I know by myself. And since I'm getting older, I'm forgetting, so I'm coming after you guys.
I just want to thank you for sharing your experience.
You're
And
welcome.
especially talking about your mother. Because I think that a lot of people don't realize that the women in our family are so pivotal in our lives. And they set the tone, and they're the strength of every family.
It's amazing because before the war, my parents were very comfortable, and we had servants and things like this. I had always governess and things like that, but that changed with the war and things like this. But my mother, I don't think I would have survived if not for her.
Did you find out what happened to your
Actually,
father and brother?
I found out they were killed or murdered. What happened in Washington, D.C., in Washington, they have the Holocaust Museum, when the Germans used to keep very accurate records of everything, and they had in Bad Arles, Germany, all the records. They opened the archives day, and they donated certain things to the museum in Washington. Washington got quite a few papers, and I have some of them now. Shows my brother, shows when he passed away or when he was murdered by them. And it was 3 months, three and a half months before the end of the war, he passed away. My father, I never found. I've heard from different people, of some of the survivors, they said maybe he was Horjuf, the German used to call a Königshitter. But so far, I haven't found anything. But I have been working with the archives in Washington because I have nothing from before the war, not even my hair, because they grew later. But I have from Bad Reichenhall, from the DP camp, and they had nothing. And I donated whatever I had from that era. And what they do, they take only the originals. We had the original, and they made copies of it. And I have 2 big books with things that I donated to them. By the way, I also made a tape for Steven Spielberg. And I think they have it in Washington Museum, possibly in different museums, because they used to send different people to make a tape of what happened to you. So it's not a pretty tale that I have to tell you, but it's part of life, and I feel an obligation to speak with so people realize so it never happens again. Because it was just, I can't imagine how people can be that cruel and that horrendous. I mean, it's just beyond understanding. I mean, if you people don't understand it, I wouldn't blame you, because I cannot understand it myself, that people can be that cruel. And the Germans were supposed to be a superior nation, more intelligentsia and what have you. Well, they're the biggest murderers.
So I want to thank you for sharing your experiences with us.
But I feel that I've got to do it at some point.
So can we thank Bella?
Well,